Welcome to the Love Insight Show, where we offer a science and research based approach to dating and relationship advice. I'm your host, Arlene Washburn, a science based dating and relationship coach and a matchmaker, and the most innovative woman in matchmaking, according to people out there. My co-host is also an award-winning expert, Brandon Rader, a psychological researcher and matchmaker. And together we bring you weekly insights about dating and relationship. And today we have a very special show with our guest that you will hear about shortly. But before we go there, let's talk about your love insight for the week, Brandon. What do you got?
Yeah, my love insight for the week, and this is for all of my singles out there, is you need to learn how to let people want you. You need to know how to make them want you. And oftentimes want comes from distance. I have found in the dating world that a lot of people, especially people with an anxious attachment style, struggle with healthy distance in the courtship process. And because of that, they can come on too strong through persistent text messages, through the need to call constantly, or the need for textual reassurance from the other person. And it just creates this environment where the person does not have an opportunity to want or miss you. Something that I'm currently working on a lot of my clients with who are experiencing this issue is teaching them how to build healthy excitement and anticipation throughout the courtship process. It's a really careful balance of building excitement and anticipation, but also not being too distant and too disengaged.
I love that. I think that's a wonderful love insight for all listeners. And I mean, that also applies to people who have been in long term relationships. So I could not agree more. I want to share my love insight for the week because it's kind of a good lead into the topic that we're going to be covering today. I mean, sort of. I had a conversation today with a client. Oh, we're getting some feedback for some reason. That's weird. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting some feedback from you, Brandon. I don't know if you want to mute in between. But anyway, so this client of mine, interestingly, I introduced someone to them a while back as a potential match, and I really felt strongly that they had a lot of things in common. And it turns out that they do, and he's actually a great match. Except that something came up today about um, what is the term? BDSM from his part. And she's now considering, like, okay, is this an area that I want to go into? And so without me even knowing that this was going to come up today, had been texting back and forth, and I was like, look, she's like, well, am I going to have to settle? When am I going to meet someone? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're going to get 80% of what you're looking for. There's no 100% of what anybody's looking for. And if 80% of it is there, maybe you need to consider someone. And so now it seems like there's 80% there, but this is one thing. And the conversation just came up. And there is a possibility that maybe she might be open to it. And so I guess my point here is that, and I'm hoping that the conversation we have during this episode, that we can talk about partners or people who are dating or who have been in long-term relationships. How do they open up these conversations to bring up kink or lifestyles or different things that they're considering that they might want, but they're afraid to bring up with their significant other? Because you'd be surprised, sometimes people will actually be into it, but it's just they're afraid to share certain vulnerable or private things that are going through their head. So this was a very interesting development, and I'm really I have my fingers crossed that things are going to work out with those two. And if she's open to BDSM, then hey, between consenting adults, it's all good. So that's what's happening on my end. And it was so weird because this just came up today and leading into this conversation. But that's my insight for the week. Just open up about it. And if you don't know how to have these conversations, you might just learn today how to open up about these conversations so that everybody's happy, everyone's fulfilled to the extent that they can be. But yeah, so that's what I have. What are your thoughts, Brandon?
I think you're absolutely right. There seems to be oftentimes in relationships and in the dating process this insecurity of opening up and sharing your wants and your desires with your partner or with someone you're dating. And I find that it always circles back to that fear of rejection. And so we've talked about fear of rejection in the dating world and how people need to overcome that and accept that rejection is just the flip side of any opportunity, including dating and relationships. And once you learn to accept that, you can embrace it and date fearlessly. But I think that that also goes into relationships, that you need to understand that rejection is part of a relationship. And you may present something that you want, a desire or a fantasy to your partner, and they may accept it or they may reject it. And just because they reject it doesn't mean they're rejecting you, it just means that they're not open to that. And people don't know how to have a healthy dialogue when, one, they are rejected and they don't even know how to, they're afraid to even begin the conversation due to fear of rejection. So I think giving people the tools to approach it in a healthy and productive way will hopefully help them overcome that fear of being rejected. But even with the tools, I think it's so important for people to understand that at any given moment, your partner or someone you're dating can reject anything that you say that you want, or your ideologies or perception on the world, and that's just part of life. You are never going to meet someone who is of the same mind 100% of the time. It's just unrealistic. And if you're living in fear, then you're also not going to be in a happy, healthy, loving relationship. I'll say it again, fear and love cannot live in the same house.
I love that. I love that. So let's talk about our topic of the day, which we came up with the title, Would a Throuple Help Your Relationship? I probably misspoke the title, but something along the lines, save your relationship. And I think where we were coming from with that, we started out the conversation where we were talking about Ben and J Lo and how he had been unfaithful the entire time. He had been unfaithful to her and unfaithful to the other Jen that he married and had children with. And now they're back together. Now they're married. And we were talking about once a cheater, always a cheater. Is infidelity something that's intrinsically inside someone, or is it something that they that's situational? We've covered a lot of that. And then there's some people who know that they don't want to be in a relationship with one person, and so we kind of wanted to bring this topic in because even I had mentioned to you that my husband and I were approached by a couple that were at a bar, and they were talking to us, basically stated that they were, they were swingers. So we're going to get into all of it, right? Because there's swingers, there's polyamory, there's all kinds of things, and we need definitions and we need explanations of everything so it's clear to everyone. But the point is that lifestyles and the way people do things and the way people have relationships now is so different. It's becoming more and more mainstream. You and I were talking about this offline, that there are shows with thruples and all kinds of, just different family dynamics, and families no longer, husband and wife and 2.2 kids and all this stuff. So I want to get into it. I want to talk about it. I want to open up everybody's mind to there's other things happening out there that are successful, there's not one size fits all. And I want to understand it myself because I don't know everything about it, which is why I'm very excited to have our guest today. But what are your thoughts, Brandon? And then we'll bring our guest on.
Oh gosh, I think that it is an apropos conversation to have in our current dating and relationship culture. I find that in my own experience with working with singles and helping them find their ideal partner, and then even working with some couples, that more and more people are becoming open to the idea of consensual non-monogamy. Now, as a gay man, I'll tell you, consensual non-monogamy is kind of the standard for gay men. And I myself am monogamous, and I've been in a committed monogamous relationship for 12 years. But it's hard to find in the within the gay community. And I work with heterosexual men, heterosexual women, and homosexual men. And all of my heterosexual clients all say that they are monogamous and that they want monogamy. But after, sometimes I'll dig into that topic of asking them, like, what does monogamy mean to them? Is it social monogamy? Is it sexual monogamy? Like, are there exceptions to this concept of monogamy for them? And sometimes when I dive into it a little bit deeper with them, it turns out that it's not full monogamy that they're looking for. But they, due to just societal expectations and standards, due to the two most influential powers in the US, government and religion, they feel that it's the expectation for them to say, I am monogamous and I want monogamy. Whereas gay men, they, just until recently, they weren't recognized by these two major formal institutions. They're still not recognized by most religious institutions. And it's very recent in our history that they're acknowledged by the government institution. And so because of that, they shaped their ideologies on what a relationship could be and should be on their own, based on their own belief systems, their own drives, their own biases, and just subjective experiences, as opposed to adhering to these doctrines of religion and government, which heterosexuals, that's where they learned these doctrines, right? It was instilled in them by these two governing entities. And so I have found that now, some gay men are moving towards the idea of monogamy, like myself, and I have met other gay men who also want monogamy. But now the flip is also happening, where I'm experiencing more heterosexuals talking about the idea of exploring consensual non-monogamy. And it's a hard conversation to navigate. It requires excellent communication skills. It requires authenticity. It requires honesty, transparency, because you can't create essentially this social contract with your partner unless you're 100% honest and authentic and candid, and vice versa, and you both feel comfortable having this conversation. And it's not something that I myself am skilled in. So I think I'm very excited to hear what our guest has to say about it. So without further ado, let's bring our guest onto the stage. Our guest is Skye Yeater. She is a dating and relationship coach, as well as a licensed professional counselor with 15 years of experience in helping couples create relationships of consensual non-monogamy.
Hi, y'all.
Hi, Sky.
Hi, Skye. How are you?
Well, hold on. I saw the app like has pop-ups, and then I don't know what to do with them, so I don't know how to get my video back. Do I have
Okay.
to make them come back? Oh, because I only see my little icon and I don't see the video.
I can send you another
I'll send you another request. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to invite you to video.
Okay, thanks. Accept. There we go.
Yay.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Hi. I am on my husband's phone. So I'm trying to figure out this tech and like charging it at the same time. It's a whole I kind of MacGyvered it a little bit. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, figuring out technology is almost as difficult as figuring out consensual non-monogamy for some people.
Very true, yeah.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your experience, not only just like overall your professional experience, but also how did you end up in this industry where you are helping couples essentially create relationships of consensual non-monogamy?
hmm Yeah, good question. So my husband and I have been together for about 15 years now, and we got together freshman year of college. And we both, before that, I recognized that I was bisexual, and now I identify as pansexual. And we both recognized that we're young, we both have big hearts, we both have high libidos, we both experience attraction to other people, and we were honest with each other about that from the start. He was actually the one who brought up the concept of non-monogamy to me because he had a friend who was doing it and kind of asked about that. And at first, like, my gut instinct was like, well, that's weird. And then when I thought about it for more than 2 seconds, I was like, well, why is that weird? His body doesn't belong to me. His heart only belongs to me as much as he wants it to. So why would that be an issue? So over the course of our relationship, we evolved. He was I was with females very early on, and then we would play together with people. And then I want to say mostly after college, we started pursuing other relationships outside of our, friend group, so to speak. And it was actually a, maybe a couple of weeks before we got married. We were sitting in a park in Amsterdam, and we were talking about our prospective relationships we were in. And we were like, because before that, we had always identified as open. We were in an open relationship because we didn't want to limit ourselves. And then we both kind of at the same time were like, I think I'm in love with this other person who I'm connecting with. And so we said, okay, we are polyamorous. Like that, that's kind of the clincher. So I have 15 years of experience with non-monogamy, and that's why I'm an expert at this, because I've practiced, and that's why I know the questions to ask, because they were the questions I didn't ask earlier in my experience. And so then when I joined the Authentic Relating, use the word authenticity, Brandon, and absolutely. When I joined the Authentic Relating community, in Houston, I'm a lead facilitator for Authentic Houston. We're a group that meets weekly to do communication exercises, essentially. And then from there, I got into coaching. And from there, I got into counseling. I'm a LPC associate. And I currently work with couples. At the practice I'm at, most of them are monogamous. Most of them are heterosexual. And I do have some homosexual couples. I have had worked with a couple of non-monogamous couples. And that's really what I would like to be my niche. That's what I would like to market more so at the practice, because I have other colleagues who are working in the same but different field. And so I really I'm all about, as you said, the word intentional relationships. To me, I don't think any style of relationship is better or worse than the other. It's about, is it intentional? Did you make the implicit explicit? And is everyone on the same page about it? Because that, to me, that's what consent is.
I want to go back a little bit and really help people understand, because this is all new to me. It's new to many people. And understanding the terminology, the proper terminology for different things and the types of relationships. And you and I talked a little bit about this guy, and I think that would be really helpful for most people who are listening.
Yeah. Okay, buckle up, y'all. Get a notepad. There's so many terms. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Brandon, being a gay person, that, there's more and more terms that are popping up in the LGBTQ plus community. And within non-monogamy, so ethical or consensual non-monogamy, again, even that has nuances to like what I prefer. I prefer the term consensual. Some people prefer ethical. And I'll be honest, right now we are living in a world where we need to put a qualifier in front of it.
My hope is that eventually we won't have to put a qualifier, right? We don't go around saying, oh, I'm an ethical monogamy. That's not a thing we do because it's the default, it's the assumption. And so, eventually I would love to see a world where we just say, I'm non-monogamous and no one bats an eye at it. We're not there yet. And as you said, that we are trending more towards that, it being more normalized. So the umbrella term is non-monogamy. Then there's different styles. So there's open, as you said, there's swingers, there's polyamory, which is what I identify as. I will say, so it's interesting that this title came from you talking to swingers, because swingers typically don't form thruples. They don't typically form lasting relationships outside of the sexual container that they're in. Again, and I'm speaking in generalities. Typically, swingers play together, usually in the same room. Usually, they kind of talk about and agree who they're going to play with and for how long. There's more rules in swinging, which is not my bag. And if you agree and consent to that, good job. And then there's open relating, right? Which that's basically non-monogamy, but you don't want to necessarily put a label on it. It just doesn't jive for you. Polyamory is the practice of having multiple romantic and or sexual relationships with consenting people. And there are people who are aromantic within it. There are people who are asexual within it. And that's actually one of the beautiful things about polyamory in my world, is that so many people can still have, as Brandon was saying about like this idea of getting different needs met. And you were saying you might not, the person you were talking about before, they might get 80% of their needs met, but not 100. So if those people did decide, hey, let's open this up for at least this context of BDSM, for you to get that specific need met by someone else, that's the beautiful thing about it. Not that, and this is what I want to make clear, not that people are need meeting machines. We should not objectify people unless they want to be objectified. And that's why, and I told you this, Arlene, the title for me and for most practicing non-monogamists is pretty cringe. It's a problematic question, because if you take the question out of the context of non-monogamy, it's a similar question to, would having a baby save your relationship? Probably not. Like, if your relationship is shitty, bringing a third person into it is not going to make it better. It's going to complicate the hell out of it. Now, it's different because a baby you can't break up with. You have it. But like that, it's a similar type of question. It's like the question itself is, to me, it's flawed because it inherently objectifies the third person with whom you might be trying to relate with, right? And I think it's an understandable question for people in the monogamous world because they don't understand all the nuance and the terminology, right? So that's why I'm here. But yeah, are there any other terms you would like me to explore?
You know what? A term that I find a term and concept that I find very interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this is an essential component for someone who is polyamorous, is compersion. Mm-hmm. And that, compersion, from my understanding, is the opposite of jealousy, essentially, and it's the ability to find joy and pleasure and happiness in your partner's joy or pleasure or happiness in another romantic or sexual relationship.
Yes, that term was coined, I want to say maybe in the 60s by early pioneers in the polyamorous community. And it's one of my favorite terms. Honestly, this is another thing where I wish it was a more commonly understood term, because it doesn't only mean a romantic or sexual relationship. It doesn't only have to apply to that. I could feel compersion for Arlene getting an awesome new hat, right? Like, when it's boiled down to it, it's joy at another person's joy. So what it is actually the opposite of is a German term called Schadenfreude, I think. I might be totally butchering that, which means joy at someone else's pain, right? It's like that sadistic kind of thing. Compersion is really the capacity to to feel joy at seeing the connection between two other people and how that's flourishing. So I was thinking about a way to describe it last night, actually. And I think the way I would describe it, and then I'll tell you how my partner described it, was whenever you see a child playing with something or experiencing something that you yourself have experienced, and you feel that like warm, fuzzy feeling, and you're like, oh yeah, that's so good. I've felt that too. And it's just this lovely flood of warmth that comes over you. To me, that's what compersion feels like. It's seeing the people I love loving each other. It's like, it's so yummy. Like it feels like comfort food for me. Because my people, I know how much their presence is a gift, and that it's a gift that to me is abundant and can be shared. And I get to see how they learn and grow through their other connections. And again, sex or not, I enjoy seeing that. And I do experience sexual compersion. I do enjoy watching my partners together. And there are people who don't, and that's fine too. The other thing I want to say about compersion is that everyone has a different capacity for compersion. It is something that can be practiced. It is something that can grow. And I also want to say that in order to be non-monogamous, that doesn't mean that you never experience jealousy. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, what it means is I'm going to own and address the jealousy I have. I'm going to say, when you do that, I didn't like it. I felt jealous. And here's how I'm working through it. I'm going to talk about it with my therapist. I'm going to talk about it with you, with my friends. I might have a request later. If I feel like I'm not getting enough quality time, I might make a request, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, and this is only my connotation with it, I differentiate between jealousy and envy. For myself, I very rarely experience jealousy. I very rarely sit there and go, because to me, jealousy is, I don't want someone to have what I have. It's a feeling of scarcity. It's like, this is mine. It's possessive. It's, you can't have this. And that stems to me from insecurity, right? Like, I have this feeling of scarcity. I need this person or this thing to feel secure, which is understandable. That's why attachment style plays into it so much. It is so important. And for me, envy is aspirational. It's, I see you having that with someone else, and I want that too. And that's where I can notice that, and I can make a request. So I just want to make that clear, that you don't have to never experience jealousy in order to be polyamorous. Just like you don't have to be the most flexible person in the world to do yoga. It's a similar concept, right? Like, you gain flexibility as a byproduct of doing yoga. It's not even necessarily the goal. And similarly with polyamory or any type of non-monogamy that's consensual and everyone's kind of on the same page, the compersion, you can desire to create and foster relationships from that compersion, and or you can grow your sense of compersion by experiencing it and kind of gradually more and more.
I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Brandon. What were you going to say?
So if you are, just like a hypothetical. So you're in a couple, and let's say one person is wanting to explore consensual non-monogamy, and they're not sure whether their partner is open to that idea. There's never been conversations around it, and they're worried about, one, how their partner might perceive them if they bring it up, but then they're also concerned about maybe hurting the feelings of their current partner, saying, I'm desiring other people other than you. What is your recommendation to address it in the relationship?
And for the record, that was going to be the same question I was going to ask. So good job.
Great question. Great minds. There's a lot to that, right? So first, I would say, get honest with yourself. What is motivating you towards that either decision or orientation? So for me, being polyamorous is an orientation. I orient as I am pansexual and polyamorous because it feels like such a deep part of who I am. Could I be monogamous with my husband and be happy? Absolutely, I could. And I recognize that, I'll just say it, he and I are exceptional in a lot of ways. We have very good communication. We have very similar values. And we both have, because of that, we both have high values on autonomy. So even when there have been times where he feels insecure, he has never once, and this is diverging a little bit, but I'll get back. He has never once requested for me to do something different than what I'm doing. He has never said, I don't want you to go on a date with that person, et cetera, et cetera. He's never tried to set rules. He's never done anything like that, which for me has felt so spacious, and I feel so trusted, and it's created a lot of space for us to have those feelings and be able to share them with each other. Whereas if he made those requests, then I probably would get more and more concerned about bringing it up, and it would snowball into a big issue. So as far as approaching it, I think being really clear on, is this coming from a place of deficit? Is that deficit something that I can address with my partner? So if, for example, and this is highly common, two people in a monogamous relationship have very different libidos, different levels of sexual desire. Maybe one person has spontaneous desire more often, and the other person has responsive desire, etc. Then that's something to notice. That's something that can be addressed by seeking things outside of the relationship. And I think, again, instead of saying, well, you're not, I think the fear is implying you're not enough for me, rather than owning, I have this deep need that is not being met. I value our relationship. I don't want our relationship in the broad terms to change. I'm committed to you. I want to be with you. And that is a choice that is really important to me. And this need is also really important to me. And can we talk about that? And can we figure out how to make that work? And now that kind of leads me into another type of non-monogamy, which is we call it monopoly, where one person identifies as monogamous and the other person identifies as polyamorous in the relationship. Now that is difficult. It can be done. In fact, one of my current partners, now his wife at this point identifies as monogamous. That might change, who knows? But that's how they've been for a long time. And so yeah, it's really, I get that it's scary. I think the other thing to do is treating them like an equal. Like, I want to figure this out with you. I want your input. I want to read some books together. I want to see what you think about this. And there are tons of books. I think I sent Arlene a list of media and books that I recommend and what order to read them in. There are relationship coaches like me. I don't know how many are relationship coaches and polyamorous, but there are relationship coaches who are familiar with non-monogamy. And I think starting out there, I have a list of 50 questions that I've compiled about exploring non-monogamy. And again, those are the questions that I figured out from the questions I didn't ask when, I was starting out. And another thing, speaking of intentional relationships, is I have, in more broad terms, I have created a process that I do called contexting connection, which parses out different aspects of a relationship. And like you said, Brandon, it's a social contract, and it's making the implicit explicit. And so it's intentions, desires, boundaries, safety, and requests. So the poly community calls it wonky birds because it's all jumbled up. And so intentions is not so much what do we want to call this. If that's not what you're into, you can say, hey, we're dating, we're boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever that means. Again, figure out what those terms mean to each other, because those terms could mean different things to different people. But more, where are we going? What is the vibe in our relationship right now? What are we wanting to build? What are we wanting to work towards? So this can be used in any type of relationship. Then there's desires. Desires for me are more about, what do I want in the relationship, even if it's not feasible, even if it's completely ludicrous. If I wanted to say I want a steak dinner every other day, right? Like, that's not reasonable. Like, but it's naming what I want. And honestly, just that practice of naming what I want with someone, it can be really empowering and really kind of juicy and fun too. Like if I'm talking about sexual things, like, oh, I want to go to a kink night once a month. The other person might go, ooh, that sounds kind of fun. I've never done that. And so it's not a request, it's not a demand, it's just, this is something I'd like. Then boundaries is, these are the things I will not tolerate in this relationship. Gaslighting, lying, trashing my friends, et cetera, et cetera. Safety is, I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I would let them know my physical safety. These are my medications, those things. And then what's my emotional safety? What do I need to feel emotionally safe in a relationship? And lastly, the requests, which is the pragmatic, the logistics. I want to talk with you this often on these platforms, and I want to see you this often on these days. And that's where there's a little bit more negotiation of how do we both try to get balance and get our needs met. So anyway, all of that is to say that I have put in a lot of time and effort into creating structures for other people to use to figure these things out. And I recognize it can be really scary to take that leap, and for that fear of either the other person feeling disgust, rejection, contempt, all kinds of things can come up. And I think if the need is loud enough, it's going to come out in messy ways. Like you were talking about with Ben, right? Like, if he keeps the whole idea of once a cheater, always a cheater, maybe he is a polyamorous or a non-monogamous person in his DNA, and there isn't a mainstream structure for recognizing that and naming that. And only a few celebrities have really come out as non-monogamous, and I'm hoping more and more do, because we all know a lot of them are, or at least there are a lot of people I'm like, I'm pretty sure most of people.
Let me ask you this though, because when we talk about polyamory and all of it, is it just about, not to be rude, but is it all based on just a sexual desire to be having intimacy with multiple people? Is that the only basis for the polyamory? Or, because I can have a girlfriend that fulfills all of my desires to be out shopping or doing whatever I need, that us girlfriends do, and then I can have a guy friend that can fulfill this other thing, and none of it have anything to do with sex. And so is this whole designation of a lifestyle that people want to have, strictly about the sex? Is that the only thing that makes it polyamory, or whatever? Which I want to kind of talk a little bit about thruples, but that's another story. Go ahead.
Good question. Absolutely not. As I was saying earlier, for some people, it could be a difference in libido. It could be something sexual. For some people, it could be, me and my partner don't really share any hobbies, and I really want to meet up with people and have a board games night. And maybe if I have a crush on that person, it's okay. And crush can look different for different people. Sorry, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So again, within the polyamorous community, there are people who are asexual, meaning they don't experience sexual desire. There are people who are aromantic, who don't subscribe to the idea of romance. And they have wonderful relationships with people in the community. So it's absolutely not just about the sex. It's about the freedom to explore what is naturally arising in a connection. That's really all it's about.
So how does it work when, like, okay, so if you are like in a polyamorous relationship and you identified that you have, multiple partners and people that you have different types of connections with, and this might be different for each, I guess you could say each polyamorous unit. But how do you decide, or how does one decide, or should they decide, is there one person your main? And like, just kind of like a logistical question, like let's say that your friend's having a wedding and they invite you to the wedding. Like, who's your go-to? Do you always is your husband your first go-to? Or like, do sometimes you feel conflicted and you're like, I want to invite this person, but I don't want my husband to be jealous that I want to invite them to the wedding and not him? Like, how does that work?
That's a good question. So that gets into the concept of different types of polyamory. So first of all, there's hierarchical and non-hierarchical. So what you're describing, hierarchical means that you consider one person to be your primary, and then you have secondary and tertiary, et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of these different tiers, these different levels of commitment with each person. Non-hierarchical, so to me, that's like a ladder, right? Like your different priorities, different levels. Non-hierarchical which is the type that I practice, is limiting that. For me, I recognize that my husband and I have certain priorities, certain ways we're going to prioritize each other. We live together, we share finances, we had a dog together, et cetera, right? So there's certain amounts of time, there's certain things where, because of the longevity of our relationship, our lives are entangled to a certain degree. And I don't personally subscribe to that my other partners are less important than he is. They're important in different ways. So, the way the metaphor I usually use is, John and I are both Leos. So we are the sun in our polycule is the word for it, for unit. And the other people in our lives are the other planets. And some of them are closer, some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller and farther away. And we all coexist. We all are in the same orbit, and none of us are more important than the other. We're all in an ecosystem together that's kind of constantly evolving. Like when I looked at a polycule little map that I had drawn out, maybe even just last year, it looks like probably about half, 60% is the same. And then the rest of it has shifted because relationships really like having that idea of I'm the most important label. Something else I'll say that feels connected to that, and I had written it down as a talking point, is to make the shift from monogamy mindset to non-monogamy mindset. It's important to reframe from individualist to ecological. It's important to reframe from the idea of equality to equity. In a monogamous relationship, it's easy to have the illusion of equality. We're going to split things 50-50, or we're going to spend exactly the same amount of time with each other, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't actually play out, but it's easier to think, oh, that's how it is. As soon as we add more people to the mix, we recognize different people have different needs. Different people have different chemistry. And there's no way to try to like hack off and rearrange and modulate those people into, no, we have to spend the exact same amount of time together, et cetera, et cetera. So, I have partners who live farther away. I have partners who work different types of jobs, so I only get to see them at a certain schedule. And so scheduling is, if you're not good at scheduling, it's going to be difficult because scheduling is a big thing. But being able to recognize, and that's why, again, I think it's important to come back to that context and connection with each person, figuring out the logistics of how often are we going to see each other? How much do we want to prioritize each other? And that might evolve over the years. It could be that you become closer and then another person drifts away, just like friendships, just like you had a best friend in college and maybe you're not as close anymore, but you still love that person. It's honestly, there are a lot more commonalities between non-monogamy and monogamy than people think.
Let me ask this, because we had in our title Throuple, and I just want to underscore the distinction between polyamory and having a throuple, where my impression is that in a throuple you have three people that are all in relationship with each other, versus a polyamory, you can have a relationship with someone that your husband doesn't have a relationship with. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So a throuple is a type of polyamory because polyamory at its essence is having romantic and or sexual, having a relationship style agreement with multiple people in its broadest terms. Typically when I think of throuple, I think of a closed triad. So that's what you were describing. So there's different configurations. Again, there's so many terms, y'all. There's different configurations. So this one would be and that's where this idea of equality just needs to go out the window. It's not going to be an equilateral triangle, y'all. It's just not. It's going to be an isosceles or scalene or whatever. It's not going to be equilateral. And I think that's a myth that people go into trying to have a throuple. That's a myth that they go into it with. So like I said, a throuple is a type of polyamorous relationship, and it is as you said, it is a closed triad. So they are monogamous with each other, and they are still non-monogamous in the grander scheme of things. And so that's the distinction there. What comes up for me when I hear the word throuple is, which again, not my favorite term, is, again, I'm speaking in generalities, a cishet male and a bisexual female seeking another bisexual female, where they all have great chemistry, they all get along and love each other equally, they all have the exact same amount of time with each other, no one feels jealous, no one feels excluded, no one desires anyone outside of that relationship. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that people want. They think that's what they want. And being in a triad configuration is hard mode. That is like trying to start Zelda on difficult when you've never even turned on a video game console. Like, it's hard, y'all. My husband and I have, over the years, been in several, 3 people configurations. And we're currently in one now. We have been for about between 6 and 9 months, because we met her at different times. That is really healthy and really lovely and very nourishing and sustainable. And it took us almost 15 years to get there. And what I would say is that at least I didn't start on this path looking for that. Again, for me, it's just about the freedom to explore a connection in a way that feels good and nourishing to both of us, whatever that ends up looking like. And so I like having a shared partner with him, and it can be really, really hard if there isn't really good communication and shared values and really diving into what do these terms mean to us, and looking at the logistics and looking at the scheduling and all of that, it's hard mode.
Yeah. I was telling Arlene that one of the two things that kind of also inspired the topic of could a throuple save your relationship is I've noticed it's starting to make its way into the mainstream. For example, I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show on Netflix, The Politician with Ben Platt. But in season 2, one of the characters, Dee Dee Standish, who's the mayor of New York, she's in a throuple, but with 2 men. And then recently, I started watching the reboot of Gossip Girl, and in season 2, it's also a female who's in a throuple with 2 males. And so I was like, this is interesting, because when I thought of a throuple previously, I always thought about that dynamic you were talking about, probably like a guy and 2 girls. And I've even had some friends who have been in throuples, and it's always been 1 guy and 2 girls. So I thought it was really cool that they were flipping that script a little bit and saying it can also be a girl and 2 guys. But I was like, this is interesting that they are incorporating it into mainstream TV shows, and that it's also some of the main characters. Like, they're not just fringe characters, they're some of the main characters, which means that they assume that people can identify with this, or at least a quality of this. Not just the throuple part, but like maybe perhaps like the overall idea of polyamory. And like you said, maybe there's this idealized version of like, they're like, okay, polyamory, throuples make sense. Like, I want that. But I agree. I was telling Arlene, to me, that seems like so much work. I was like, it's hard to be in a relationship with one person. I was like, I don't have, going to your point about scheduling, I was like, I don't have the time for that. I was just looking at my calendar. I'm like, we have Saturdays carved out, my partner and I, and we call them Saturdays. And so we carve out Saturday just for us, no social media, just being around each other, trying new things, and, just really connecting with each other. And we had to schedule it 1 day per week because it was really hard to make that time throughout the week. And because both of us are very busy and we're on different schedules. And so I was like, God, a throuple. I was like, I don't know how these people would have time for that.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most common things I hear is like, how do you have time for that? I barely have time for my cat or whatever, it's like, and yeah, again, that's why for me, it feels so much of an orientation, because the scheduling part takes work and can be stressful. And it's like, oh, it's work I enjoy. Like, I get so much out of it. It's that's why I love what I do, being a relationship coach and a counselor, because it really aligns with what I'm doing in my personal life so beautifully. And, I was between grad school and going back to work, I had like a summer free, my first in a while. And I was soaking it up, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to fit work into my social life. Like, this is going to be a challenge. And it's true. Like, I'm still figuring it out. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of communication with people regularly to, how do we want to carve out time for each other? And can we get on some sort of consistent schedule with each other? And for the most part, I've been able to do that pretty well. And it's really about what are your priorities, right? Like, if your priority is to have really wonderful dates and connections with your people, you're going to do it. You'll make it work.
Do people ever feel slighted that that you're legally married to your husband and therefore could never really legally be married to them? And do they feel that maybe they're missing out on the benefits of marriage and, the financial or even the fact that they don't live with you? I'm assuming that you live just you and your husband in the same home, right? So, like, does any of those things come up as you're forming these relationships? And also, how do you meet people who are even open to it? Because I know sometimes, back in the day, when gays weren't getting married and stuff like that, and everybody was so anti, it was hard to meet, especially for women, if it wasn't obvious that you were a lesbian or not, and the community became small and incestuous and all this, because it was very hard to know who was who. A lot of times the gay bars were men, and so it's just so many questions that I'm thinking about for people. If somebody's listening to this and saying, maybe this is something that that we need or that we're looking at, where do I begin?
Yeah, so I'll answer both questions. The first question about how do my other people I approach or my other partners feel about the fact that I'm married and nested with my husband. It really hasn't overtly been an issue, because what I see often in people who are practicing non-monogamy, and particularly those who have been doing it for a while, is that jealousy comes up and insecurity comes up more often when a new person is added. But pretty much anyone you have in your pack before you meet that person, it's like, oh, okay, they're part of that's your family. Like, that's your chosen family. And now I'm going to find a way to fit in. So I've much more often from monogamous people gotten the question of, why did you get married if you're non-monogamous? Which is, again, it feels like a similar question as like, would a throuple save your relationship? It's like, well, why does anyone get married? Like, we love each other. There are social and financial benefits to it, right? Like, and so there's both romantic and practical reasons of why we chose to do that. And something that I practice, I haven't gotten to do it yet because the person who I was dating, where I passed this milestone, decided they weren't ready for it. But what I have decided for myself is that at 5 years with a partner, I'm going to have a commitment ceremony with them. And I'm going to publicly acknowledge them, have a party, and it's basically going to be a wedding, right? Just without the marriage license. So I find ways of like helping my people feel special, reassuring them, like prioritizing them, and I don't want to say making them feel important, but hopefully helping them feel important in my life. And let's see, have I fully answered that question? Yeah, so, I think I have one partner who I've been with a little over 3 years now, who, like, as soon as I told him about this, shortly after we started dating, I think he was already planning our commitment ceremony. That's the type of person he is, which I love about him. I think at times, because he did grow up religious and he did grow up thinking, he either was on the track of, I'm going to be a bachelor my entire life, or I'm going to get married and have kids. And so when he fell in love with me, which was, a few years ago, like, he had his heart broken when he was younger, and he basically just shut it down after that. So when he fell in love with me, it was very like teen romance again, like, oh my gosh, I'm so into you, like all this stuff. It was really sweet. And he's someone who I think is still unpacking what Brandon was talking about that institutionalized idea of what your future is supposed to look like, what your relationships are supposed to look like. So he's expressed, we see each other often and we come to each other's houses. He hasn't really expressed like sadness about not living together. In fact, I think he kind of likes having his own space. Honestly, that feels true for me for most of my partners. Like, they like having their own space. And the other thing I will say that I'll kind of add to that is almost all of my partners have other partners themselves. So that's another pro tip, is if you're getting into non-monogamy, it is actually like, especially if you are already partnered, it is much easier to get into a relationship with someone else who is already partnered, because they also have someone they're prioritizing. They also know what it's like to have to like shift schedules. They also have someone who is helping them feel secure. And you're not their everything. You don't become their entire world, because before that they were single, and now they're in the NRE, the new relationship energy, the limerence. They're in that phase, but they know how to temper it because they have someone who kind of helps stabilize them. Now, not always, but typically speaking, and again, that's why I think our relationship with our current girlfriend is going so well, is because she is partnered and has been with that person for 7 years, has identified as non-monogamous well before that. And so there's already that practice and that identity. And then for people who are new, you're just going to have to fumble your way through it and find a coach who can help you. It's the same as when you're single. You just have to like throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks. I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, so far that hasn't been too much of an issue. What I do know is that he would like to have children at some point, and he has expressed sadness that that's not something he and I are going to do. And which I get. And so that's a thing to process, right? And if he wants that for himself, I want that for him. I want him to meet someone who he can continue to be himself, his authentic self, and have a family with. And I really support that. To your second question, how do we meet? That's a great question. I would say to start out, look up local polyamory meetup groups, or if you lean towards swinging, whatever type of non-monogamy you're going for, look up local groups, look up community activities where they're meeting and talking about these different subjects. That's a really good way to learn about the community without having to, at some point you're going to break some hearts and your heart's going to get broken, and that's just part of it. That's part of the sauce. And delving into the community a little bit before trying to actually pursue a relationship, I find to be a better practice. And I would say the apps, so I've only ever used one dating app. My husband uses a lot of them, and actually it has fantastic luck on them. It's a little uncanny. We joke that it's Leo luck. So I would say Feeld, Feeld, is a really good app for people exploring non-monogamy. There's another one. Bumble is okay. I'm trying to remember. OKC, OkCupid is okay. I would honestly say Feeld, and then there's one more that I'm forgetting the name of, again, because I don't use these apps. So like my partners just mention, oh, I met this person on this app. I met this person on this app. I'm like, okay. And so I would say Feeld has been the best one because almost everyone on there is really upfront about being non-monogamous. They're like, this is how many partners I have. This is, I'm, fully vaccinated, all of that. Like most of them put all of that in their profile. If they're a couple seeking a third for a sexual experience, they're pretty explicit about that. They're like, hey, we're a couple. We're looking for someone to play with. Hit us up. Again, not my jam, but like, cool. If y'all are into that, go for it. And that is a term called unicorn hunting within the polyamorous community, is, again, this idea of a couple who is going out looking for a third for their gratification, right? Like be it sexual or whatever, trying to form a throuple. That is referred to as unicorn hunting, which absolutely can be problematic if the people are not being clear about their intentions. I think more people are getting clearer about their intentions now that it's a more acceptable thing to be looking for. And the reason I don't just completely say it's unethical and malign it is because I know people out there who identify as unicorns and they're like, yeah, I'm totally down for that. Hit me up. And so I don't want to say, it's not an okay thing. Again, as long as everyone is consenting. And I want to quickly go over the 5 aspects of consent. I actually have a prop for this. I'm not going to go grab it right now though, but it's called fries. So I have little stuffed fries. So consent is freely given. Consent is reversible. Consent is informed. Consent is enthusiastic, and consent is specific. So fries. So that's why I like the term consensual non-monogamy, because all of that is baked into consent for me. It's informed. Everyone knows what's happening. Everyone's happy about what's happening. And that's where, you get into the idea of, am I coercing my partner into doing this? To me, that's unethical. And I think it's more, is it a boundary? Is it a need or is it an ultimatum? Is it, I'm going to leave you if you don't do this with me? That's shitty. That's a not good way to phrase it. Is it, hey, this is a really deep need I have. I'm committed to our connection. I want to keep being in relationship with you. And I understand that if that doesn't work for you, then you need to do what you need to do for the relationship. I want to stay in this relationship, but if you're not comfortable with my actions that I need to do for myself, then you can make your decisions accordingly. And I think that's the better way to approach it. Yeah. That was a lot.
Well, I'll say one last thing before we wrap up, and then I'll pass it over to Brandon. But it just occurred to me that both Ben and J Lo are both Leos, also. But Brandon, what did you want to add before we close up? I can't believe a whole hour has gone by, and I think we can talk forever. This is so fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I love everything you said, and I think for anyone listening, kind of like maybe the more apropos title is, could polyamory or a non-monogamous relation, or non-monogamy save your relationship? And I think that like the big takeaway here for people is, if you're questioning this, you got to be right with yourself first. You got to ask yourself those questions. You need to know what you want. I love that idea of coming up with, what are your intentions? What are your requests? What are your boundaries? What do you need for safety? Like, do that on your own. Figure out like what it is you're actually wanting and looking for. So then that way, when you bring it to your partner and approach, they know exactly what it looks like, and you can answer those questions that they're going to have about trying to better understand it. Like, if not, then you're going to present this information to your partner and you're not going to have the answers because you're not being truthful or authentic, or you haven't reflected. And I think that self-work needs to be done before you could ever approach your partner about non-monogamy.
Absolutely. And
I love it.
The last thing I'll say, so in my world, the best title would be, is non-monogamy right for me and or my partner?
Yeah.
That's it. Because if you're talking about anything saving the relationship, the only people who can save the relationship are the people in that relationship. And potentially with the help of an experienced professional coach or therapist, but even then, I see couples come into my office all the time who aren't ready. They're not ready to do the work. So I can provide all the tools in the world, but if they're not doing the work, they're just spinning the wheels. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with that too. So, it's really about them. So what I would say is, make sure you have a strong foundation before you try to add a sunroom.
I love it. I love it. And I think we're going to end on that note. Sky, you have been an amazing pleasure to have on the show. I hope that you will come back. I have learned so much. And anyone who's listening either now or to the replay, think it through. Figure out what your needs are and have conversations. I think it's so important to just have open, honest conversations with your partners. And you might find that you're both on the same page, or maybe you're not. But you're not going to know unless you have that conversation. So what is the best place for people to get a hold of you? I know you gave me, we've added it to the show notes, but if you want to just let everybody know.
Yeah, so I currently have a Facebook page called Sincerely Sky Coaching. So that's where you can find me. You can message me on there. I'm, post grad school, I'm in the works of getting a website up and launched. And then I think you might have put it in the comments, but I also want to plug a couple of people, a couple of colleagues in the field. So my colleague, Erin Hickok, who's in the Authentic Relating community, I actually was going to bring these cards in and then we got into it. But her name is Erin Hickok. She's based out of Austin, and she has a website called Games for Humanity. And she creates these card decks that are color coordinated to the chakras, the chakra system, if you're familiar with that. And this deck is called Let's Talk About Sex. Now, I use this deck a lot in my personal life and with clients because it's not just about sex. Again, that's what I like about it is, to me, being in a relationship means, to me, intimacy means, to me, union means. they're sentence stem prompts that I think are really great to get couples talking about these concepts. And let's dissect that. Let's figure out what that means to me and what that probably means about my value system. So I use these with my clients regularly, and they're really good.
Maybe we'll invite your recommendation. I think you sent them to me in an email as well. So definitely, we'll be having guests here on a regular basis. So that'll be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other colleague I want to plug is their name. It's they them are their pronouns. Their name is Dr. Hazel Grace Yates, and it's YATES. Their website is very simple. It's drhazelgraceyates.com. And they are also polyamorous. They're actually like adjacent in my polycule. They're my meta, so they're dating someone who I'm dating. And I have looked up to Dr. Hazel Grace Yates for years and years since I met them. They have their doctorate in human sexuality. And so while we're kind of the inverse of each other, while they know a good bit about polyamory, and I know a good bit about intimacy and sex, I know a lot about intentional relationships and polyamory, and they know a lot about intimacy and sex. So if you are looking for someone to help you with your sexual relationship, even with yourself, with intimacy, with anything having to do with you as a human and your sexuality, I highly recommend Dr. Hazel Grace Yates.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those referrals. And Brandon, how can people reach you?
As always, you can connect with me on Instagram at Brandon Rader Official, on TikTok at Psyched About You, or on my website at brandonrader.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And as you know, you can reach me on Instagram at Arlene Washburn. Go to the loveinside.show if you want to get notifications about our show. And we'll be back with you next week again, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Love Insight. Thank you all for joining. And thank you so much, guys. Such a pleasure to have you. Good night, everyone.